I found it so refreshing, and suddenly it felt like everyone was buzzing about it. So I decided to go back and watch a couple more of his films, and that's when it all clicked for me. You've always pictured Clint Eastwood as the calm, wise, and untouchable icon, haven't you? Well, I'm here to tell you that you were wrong. At 95, the legend finally dropped his stoic mask. He revealed a side darker than anyone could have possibly imagined, and he's naming the six stars who he says betrayed him. They were the ones who stood beside him in fame and glory, only to turn around and stab him in the back when he needed them most. And once you hear their names, I promise you'll understand why Clint Eastwood was a man who never forgave. And he certainly never forgot. Let's begin with number one, Leonardo DiCaprio, Hollywood's golden boy. What could he have possibly done that would make Clint Eastwood never forgive him? What on earth could make Clint Eastwood walk off his very own movie set? The answer, in two words, is Leonardo DiCaprio. When filming for Times, J. Edgar Times began back in 2010, everyone thought it was a dream pairing. You had Hollywood's calmest director working with its most famously intense actor. What could go wrong? But insiders have told me it quickly turned into a quiet nightmare. From day one, DiCaprio showed up with entire folders of notes. I'm talking pages of historical research and even his own marked up FBI memos. Crew members later said you could practically watch Clint's legendary patience evaporate right before your eyes. He came in like a detective trying to solve me, Clint supposedly joked on one occasion, and I wasn't the case. But let me tell you, behind that dry humor was a growing irritation. Then they finally reached the breaking point, the big emotional breakdown scene. Leo, being the actor he is, completely nailed it in one single take. It was raw, real, and utterly flawless. The whole room went silent. I heard Clint just murmured, "Perfect. Cut." But Leo, he wanted another take and then another. By the sixth take, Clint wasn't even behind the camera anymore. He was just leaning on the craft services table. He had a coffee in his hand and a stone cold look on his face. Someone apparently asked him if he was okay. He just muttered back, "He's still searching for something I already found." When filming finally wrapped, there was just this heavy silence, which, as you might know, is Clint's kind of silence. In casting meetings after that, the story always went the same way. Whenever DiCaprio's name came up, Clint would just shake his head. "Great actor," he'd reportedly say, "but he's not my kind of actor." They have never reunited for a film, never shared a stage, and as far as I know, never exchanged a single word since. Leo eventually got his Oscar years later, but he never got another call from Eastwood. Because for Clint, you see, perfection isn't about doing it over and over again, it's about getting it right once and then never wasting another second. Now for number two, Michael Moore, the man who finally pushed Clint too far. The moment Michael Moore compared Clint, Eastwood's masterpiece asterisk, American Sniper asterisk, to Nazi propaganda, you might as well say he pulled the trigger on a friendship that was never even there to begin with. Clint stood there, but he didn't yell. No, he just froze him out of his life forever, and this wasn't even their first clash. The tension between them had been simmering since 2005, when Eastwood stood up on that stage at the National Board of Review Awards and just growled into the microphone, "If Michael Moore ever shows up at my door with a camera, I'll kill him." The room let out a nervous laugh. But Clint didn't. He just stared straight ahead and walked right off the stage. You have to understand, that wasn't a joke to him. That was a line drawn in the sand. To truly get the grudge, you have to know what Clint Eastwood stands for: discipline, quiet service, and that old school sense of honor. Moore's documentaries, especially Times Fahrenheit 9 divided by 11 asterisk, struck him as nothing more than political grandstanding disguised as art. He sees soldiers as pawns. "I see them as heroes," Eastwood once revealed in a rare outburst to a close friend. For him, it was always about respect. Then, nearly a decade later, it happened. Moore mocked Times American Sniper Times online, writing that it reminded him of the Nazi sniper movie featured in Times' Inglorious Bastards asterisk. He tried to insist it was just a joke, but people close to Clint said he was absolutely livid. He doesn't forget insults. One of his longtime collaborators explained to me. He deletes them, and that's precisely what he did. Since that tweet, Michael Moore's name has been completely erased from Clint's orbit. You see, Eastwood has worked with liberals and conservatives, but he draws the line at anyone who mocks soldiers. To him, Moore didn't just cross that line, he spit on it. Today, if you dare to mention Michael Moore in Clint's presence, I guarantee you the conversation will come to an immediate end. Number three, Barbara Streisand. She was the perfectionist who provoked the ultimate cowboy. If there's one name that still makes Clint Eastwood's jaw tighten, even after 9 decades in Hollywood, I'm telling you, it's Barbara Streisand. She's the one who got under his skin so deeply that he reportedly still refuses to say her name in interviews. Their feud became one of Hollywood's coldest wars. It all started back in the early 1980s when both of them were making that big leap from actors to directors. Streisand, you see, was the queen of control. We're talking 40, 50, sometimes even 60 takes just to capture one single expression. Clint, on the other hand, worked in the exact opposite way: 2 takes, max. Then you move on. He was famous for saying, if it's not real the first time, it's not worth filming. To him, Barbara represented everything that was wrong with the new Hollywood: obsessive control, vanity, and just endless overthinking. By the early 90s, their opposing creative philosophies had curdled into open contempt. When Times the Prince of Tides Times failed to get Streisand a Best Director nomination, back in 1992, Eastwood was overheard telling a friend, maybe if she made decisions faster, she'd finish more than 3 films in 15 years. That comment spread through the industry like wildfire. Then came Times, the Bridges of Madison County asterisk, the project that shattered whatever fragile piece was left between them. Streisand had been attached to direct it for a while, but eventually dropped out after years of her own indecision. So Eastwood swooped right in, rewrote the script himself, and delivered a quiet, emotionally devastating masterpiece. The film won Meryl Streep an Oscar nomination, and it won Clint his revenge without him ever having to say a single word. Since then, they've avoided each other completely. For Clint, she became the living symbol of everything he despised in the art of filmmaking: hesitation, excessive control, and what he saw as the death of pure instinct. In his code, you pull the trigger once, not 50 times. And now for number four, Tommy Lee Jones, the one alpha male that Clint just couldn't tame. The very first day, Tommy Lee Jones walked onto the set of Asterisk in The Line of Fire Times back in 1993. Clint Eastwood supposedly leaned over to a crew member and just muttered, 2 bulls in 1 pen. This won't last. And you know what? He was absolutely right. At first, everyone thought they'd be the perfect on screen pair. But behind the camera, it was an absolute duel. You see, Jones wasn't the kind of actor to take quiet direction. He barked, he argued, he rewrote his own lines, and he kept on performing long after the director had yelled the word cut. Clint, who was known for running his sets with a calm, efficient, and silent authority, just watched in total disbelief. He'd stay in character between takes, one technician recalled to me. Clint would just stare at him like, what in the world are you doing? The tension finally hit its absolute peak during a very heated confrontation scene. Jones was towering over Clint, fully immersed in his character, spitting every single line with pure venom. The director yelled, "Cut!" But Jones just kept right on going, glaring straight into Eastwood's eyes. The entire crew froze. After what felt like an eternity, Clint whispered to his assistant, "Life's too short for that kind of theater." Then he simply turned around and walked off the set. From that exact moment, I'm told the decision was made. When casting directors later suggested Jones for any of Eastwood's future projects, Clint didn't even hesitate. He's a great actor, he'd say politely, but we don't speak the same language. The translation was clear: never again. And they never have reunited. They've never shared a panel together, and they've never even mentioned each other in interviews since. In Eastwood's world, there's only room for one alpha on set, and he's always the one calling cut. Let's move to number five. Richard Burton, the legendary drinker who pushed Clint's patience right to the edge. I'm telling you, Clint Eastwood doesn't lose his temper easily. But Richard Burton came dangerously close to making it happen on the 1968 set of Times where Eagles Dare Asterisk. This time, the tension wasn't about ego or fame. It was all about work ethic. Burton would show up late, he would slur his lines, and sometimes he smelled distinctly like the night before. Clint, who was already dressed and ready to go at dawn, would just stand there, watching him stumble his way through take after painful take. One crew member swore to me that you could literally see the respect draining from Clint's face like water from a leaky cup. Burton at the time was in the middle of his famously stormy marriage to Elizabeth Taylor, and it seemed like every night ended in a bar, and every morning the poor crew paid the price for it. Clint didn't yell or lecture. No, he just waited, cold, silent, and becoming more and more disgusted. After Burton blew the exact same line for the 10th time in a row, Clint supposedly muttered under his breath, "I'm getting paid by the picture, not by the hour." The crew let out a nervous laugh, but I'm told Burton didn't. The message had clearly landed. But the final straw came when Burton was overheard calling the movie nothing more than a paycheck job. To Eastwood, that was like a slap in the face. He believed that every single film, even a fun action flick, deserved your full commitment. Years later, when someone asked him about working with Burton, Clint didn't even bother to sugarcoat it. Talented guy, he said. Wasted talent. That was all he said, and it was all he ever needed to say. The film, of course, became a massive hit, but their professional relationship died right there on that set. Clint never worked with him again, and he never spoke about him in public again. For a man who sees silence as his ultimate weapon, what Burton did was a final, unforgivable act. Number 6 on my list, Jean Seberg, the one woman who managed to shatter Clint's legendary patience. You'll notice Clint Eastwood never, ever talks about the movie Times Paint Your Wagon asterisk. And if you're wondering why, the answer, my friend, is Jean Seberg. She was so much more than his co star in that 1969 musical. She became the very reason he made a solemn promise to himself that he would never let sympathy get in the way of his work again. You have to understand, Seberg was a fragile and unpredictable person, and she was already being watched by the FBI. This was because of her political activism, and on the set, her emotions were a storm that swept everyone up. One day, she'd light up the set, charming the entire crew with her smile, and the next, she'd be locked in her trailer for hours. Clint was her polar opposite, intensely focused, always on time, and completely allergic to that kind of drama. By week 3, he was at his breaking point. I'm told she would stop a scene cold, right in the middle of a take, to ask about her motivation. A script supervisor once told me that Clint would just stand there, his eyes fixed on the floor, just waiting for her to be done. You could almost feel a part of him dying inside with every passing second. The real fallout, however, came much later, after Time's Paint Your Wagon Times was released, and it completely bombed. Seberg actually told reporters that it was Clint's wooden performance that was responsible for dragging the whole movie down. To Clint, that was the most profound kind of betrayal, publicly attacking a colleague. It was especially cutting after he had spent months patiently trying to hold the fragile production together for everyone's sake. From that moment on, a switch was flipped. She was completely cut off. He never spoke her name in public again. If anyone even tried to bring her up, he'd smoothly change the subject, light a cigar, and simply walk away. Years later, when the heartbreaking news of Seberg's tragic death surfaced in 1979, Clint maintained his public silence. Friends said he appeared genuinely sad, but his resolve never softened. Some people just aren't cut out for the work, he once said in a quiet moment. And I don't need to deal with it twice. Believe me, that's the closest he has ever come to anything that sounds like forgiveness. So, I have to ask you, what's your take? Do you think Clint Eastwood was right to cut them out of his life so completely? Or did his famous silence go too far in the end? Tell me what you truly believe in the comments section below. And remember to subscribe for more of these incredible, untold Hollywood stories that were never supposed to see the light of day.